Welcome back to Proxy everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the predicted nerfs to the Eldar in the January balance data slate. So we all know it's coming, we know the Eldar are going to get another nerf, but the big question remains, what is GW going to decide to nerf? A lot of things have already been nerfed in the Codex pretty hard since the release of 10th edition, so what is GW going to decide to target to bring Eldar down to the range that they should be in? You know, that 45 to 55% tournament win rate that GW always claims means an army is balanced. Well, as a matter of fact, even though it is still 8 weeks or so out, GW has given us an inclination of what they're going to nerf and why in a MetaWatch interview on Warhammer Community. So what we're going to do is we're going to unpack that a little bit and talk a little bit about how that will affect the Craftworld Eldar competitively going forward. So without further ado, let us go ahead and jump right into today's video. But first, we're going to do a quick overview of today's video. We're going to be recapping the last set of Eldar nerfs in September and looking at the win rate difference just to catch some of you up who maybe haven't been paying attention to that so much. I'm going to give you my 5 predictions for the January balance update and what the nerfs will mean for competitive play. Okay, so let's go over the last set of Eldar nerfs in September and look at the win rate difference. So there were a couple of things that did get nerfed. Not only did Eldar get nerfed as far as their points on several units, but Phantasm also got a nerf. Devastating Wounds itself got a nerf, which is what everyone was using back then with Eldar armies. Towering got nerfed, again, the Wraith Knight, of course, and you can no longer overwatch out of line of sight. Something else I didn't really mention here because, you know, Towering got nerfed, but also Titanic units cannot overwatch at all anymore. So not only did Overwatch, you know, get hit with an out of line of sight nerf, but Titanic units can no longer overwatch. So basically that took the Wraith Knight out of competitive play. And this dropped the Eldar win rate from about 67% to about 57%. So pretty significant. If you consider that the Eldar were winning basically every tournament out there, or at least placing in most competitive tournaments at some point, just because they had such a strong array of, you know, devastating wound capabilities and board control with that Wraith Knight. However, there were points nerfs to several other units, so Wraith Knight is not only the thing that got hit. Of course, it did also get a points nerf, but Farseers, the Avatar of Cain, the Yin-Karn, Shadow Specters, Warp Spiders, Fire Prisms, Support Weapons, Vipers, Warwalkers, Hornets, Night Spinners, Autarchs, Death Jesters, the Lynx, the Warp Hunter, Wraithguard, Illic, Dark Reapers, and Azurman all got points increases, and I'm pretty sure I'm missing one in there somewhere. So even though a lot of these units didn't get increased that much in points, some of them did, and by significant margins. The Autarch Wayleaper, of course, and the Yin-Karn are standouts there. They got increased by a significant margin. And as a result, Eldar armies shrunk considerably in size, as most of the nerfed units were still great picks. So again, a lot of these units on the list we're still using, right? We're still using Wraithguard, we're still using Night Spinners, of course, even more so now, with the void of the Wraith Knight that, you know, the Wraith Knight left behind. Fire Prisms are still used, Warwalkers are still used, Hornets are still used. I could go on. A lot of these units are still very competitive, so, you know, even though we're still using these units, the size of our armies did shrink. Especially for those players who weren't really using the Wraith Knight. I know super competitive players basically had it as an auto-include in their army, but, you know, for players like me who like to try different things out and not always run the most OP broken stuff, a lot of our armies did shrink a little bit as a result. The other big thing was that Phantasm got nerfed. So Phantasm can only be used on infantry units now, and this increased the resource cost of units that needed to hide. So Fire Prisms, for example, now needed to use Fire and Fade for 2 command points. So that was a big nerf. I know a lot of you probably thought it was, you know, we got off easy on that one. But it didn't only affect things like Fire Prisms and stuff, it also affected things like jet bikes, you know, because Phantasm was a really cheap way to, you know, use on Wind Riders or use on Shroud Runners, you know, the things that really competitive players at the time weren't really using, but maybe some of us, you know, were playing around with. That actually was kind of a side nerf to them as well. And even though I did think it was a justified nerf, Phantasm is very powerful and maybe shouldn't be used on every single unit, I still think they should have kept it on things like jet bikes. So in addition, Devastating Wounds also got nerfed. So they changed Mortal Wounds to ignore armor and invulnerable saves. So Devastating Wounds no longer cause mortal wounds. That means the wounds aren't dealt one at a time. They now just ignore armor and invuls. So that means that wounds don't carry over and can be affected by damage reduction and other modifiers normally, which is how it should be. I think Devastating Wounds was way too powerful before, especially on models that could do multiple damage with their weapons like the Wraith Knight and Wraith Cannons and stuff like that. So I do think this was a good change. I was actually advocating for this change from the beginning of the edition. So, hey, look at that. GW actually listened to their community on this one. Towering also got nerfed, which I was glad for. I know it nerfed the Wraith Knight, but it was so good for so many other things, especially for Eldar as a fast and quick faction. Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights could see over ruins and things like that, ignoring obscuring terrain, essentially. So it was good to see this get nerfed. And basically what happened was Towering no longer ignores obscuring terrain for the purposes of drawing line of sight. So that was a good change in the game, I felt. Even though it did target the, Eldar meta list very hard. You can also not use Overwatch out of line of sight anymore, and Titanic models cannot Overwatch at all. So models like the D Cannon and the Wraith Knight could no longer exert exceptional board control without having line of sight. And the Wraith Knight can't Overwatch at all, which is probably pretty good. And I think the fact that Titanic models can't Overwatch at all anymore is a good thing. Even for armies like Imperial Guard, right? The Baneblade and stuff like that. It was just kind of ridiculous to get overwatched by some of that stuff. So I'm glad that they got rid of that and fixed that. And in general, I think this was a good nerf for the game. It did affect the top meta Eldar list very hard. But it also was just a good quality of life change for the game. Overwatch is a very devastating, or was a very devastating stratagem, and still is very good and very strong. So toning that down a little bit is, in my opinion, quite the benefit. I know some of you guys might love Overwatch out there and think it's just fine, it's balanced, but it is a very strong, basically stratagem that's available to anyone, right? A core stratagem. So I'm glad that they toned that down a little bit from where it was in the beginning of the edition. All right, so those were the nerfs that occurred that really basically affected the Craftworld Eldar and brought them down from, 67% win rate to a 57%. So that doesn't seem like a huge difference, but it actually is very big, especially when you consider the types of lists that Eldar players are now running. A lot has changed in the Eldar meta. We're no longer running the Wraith Knight. We're no longer running certain, kind of units that were meant to Overwatch. D cannons aren't as common as they once were. However, we still are using several of the units that they nerfed before, right? And GW came out and in their MetaWatch interview actually stated that they were going to look at 3 units in particular: the Wraith Guard, the Avatar of Cain, and the Night Spinner, as far as what units needed to be toned down a little bit. However, here are my 5 predictions for the January balanced data slate. I don't think they're just going to stop at those 3 units. I think they're going to nerf a couple more. It's going to be a light nerf. It's not going to be like before where it was just a heavy, kind of sledgehammer to a lot of different things. It's going to be a more precise nerf, a scalpel, if you will. So I think they are going to obviously target Wraith Guard, the Avatar of Cain, and the Night Spinner. They have called those out specifically, so I think they're actually, yes, going to nerf those. I also think they are going to touch up on Fate's Messenger. It is a very powerful enhancement that compares way too well to other enhancements in other indexes, so I think they will nerf that, either with a slight points increase or something else. We'll talk about that in a second. And even though this might be an unpopular opinion, I think that the Swooping Hawks are going to get nerfed a little bit. So talking about Wraith Guard, I think we will either see a 15-point increase per 5 models, so they'll cost 185 for 5, or have their ability tweaked slightly to only be able to target the unit that attacked them. So as of now, they're really powerful. They're being run in 10 blocks, so 10-man units, very tough, very durable, and have an insane amount of damage and board control between Fate's Messenger, Overwatch, and their ability. Not to mention, these guys are a great buff soak, so they can take up Guide and they can take up Fortune and just become extremely durable or extremely hard-hitting, and they don't really sacrifice a lot for it. Yes, they do have a good amount of counterplay. Getting them in melee is a great way to deal with them. There's a lot of things you can do. Use precision weapons against the spirits here and things like that. So there are counters out there for them. They just, they are probably a little bit too efficient for their points cost. So I feel like GW with these guys is just going to give them a slight points increase, make them a little bit more than Wraith Blades so that there's a little bit more of a comparison there between the two units. Or what they might do is they might decide to keep them the same and just make them more comparable to Wraith Blades by changing the ability a little bit so that it's less good. So either, they have to target the unit that shot at them when they shoot back or something along those lines. Maybe they'll make it so that only on a 4+ the unit gets to actually shoot back. Who knows what they'll do with that. They might make it something akin to the Wraith Blade ability where if one dies, then that dying model can shoot, Who knows? But in any case, I think we can be certain that we are going to see some sort of Wraithguard nerf. The Avatar of Khaine is also surely going to see a nerf. I think we will see a points increase of around 15 points, bringing him to 350. So I think they really want to probably make him on the same level as the Yinkarn here. It will bring him in line with that model and also make him a harder choice for list building. Personally, I think he'll still be great at that cost, just might be harder to fit in a list with some of the other inevitable nerfs. You might not be able to fully fit Avatar of Khaine, Wraithguard, and other, units in your list as well. And you're going to have to, do some reconfiguring just to bring you down a little bit. And again, GW's point here isn't to make the Eldar useless or nerf them into the ground. It's to give them a little bit of a harder choice when choosing between some of the most competitive units and strong units in the index. Now we come to the Night Spinner, of course. So the Night Spinner is going to be nerfed. And a lot of people may think that the Night Spinner has already been nerfed too much because it's 180 points and it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. But it does have indirect fire, which is a very powerful mechanic. It has devastating wounds. So, if you're running like 2 to 3 of these things, they can actually do some very significant damage. And they combo very well with other units in the index, like the Yinkarn. And on top of that, its ability is insane. So the Night Spinner will have its ability changed to either not affect monsters or vehicles or no longer prevent advances. Something is going to happen with that ability because as of now, it's extremely oppressive and really prevents slower armies from interacting with objectives at all. And especially when spammed. If you're running 3 of these things and you're going up against a Custodes player or a Death Guard player, or even an Orc player, right? Because if you wah and you can advance and charge and your units can't advance because they've been hit by Night Spinners, that can be extremely devastating to an Orc army. So I don't think a simple points increase will prevent these oppressive interactions from taking place, which is why I see its ability being nerfed instead. This thing has already had 3 points increases. It's been increased to 180 points, which, for the cost means that as far as damage goes, it's very damage inefficient. But it can do precise damage exactly where it wants to, wherever it wants to, because it has indirect fire, and it has devastating wounds and twin linked. So that's why its damage is still respectable, not because of how much damage it can do, but because of what it can target. And lastly, the most problematic part about this thing isn't the damage, because we should have something that can deal indirect fire. We should have a tool in our armies for that, right? Every army should have something like that. The Death Guard have the, Plague Burst Crawlers, and the Imperial Guard have the Basilisks and stuff like that. So the Eldar should have some sort of indirect fire, but the ability itself is just too strong. It does too much, in my opinion, for, what the current state of the game is. So I think that's probably going to be toned down just a little bit. And I still think it'll be good if they tone it down. It just won't be spammed as much. Maybe somebody will bring one of them to the table or something like that. And it won't be something that everybody takes in pairs or in trios. The other nerf I see happening is the nerf to Fate's Messenger. So I think this is something that GW didn't mention right off the bat, but I do think it is a problematic enhancement for the cost on a couple of different units. So I see it increasing by 10 points to about 25 points, or changing from once per turn to once per round. And just how the enhancement is actually written, it means that you can change a dice after you roll. So this makes shooting on the Death Jester, for example, and the Wraith Guard extremely efficient, especially when, units have things like devastating wounds or sustained hits. And because of this, it usually makes up its cost in a single turn and can be used once each turn for a total of 10 times per game, which has absolutely insane value. So, we're seeing this enhancement in pretty much every competitive list that has a Death Jester or a unit of Wraith Guard, and there is a reason for that. It is very powerful, it is very efficient, and I think it's probably going to get tweaked a little bit, either to its total points cost or to its effect to limit it to once per round. Lastly, I think swooping Hawks are going to be getting a little bit of a nerf. So I think it's not going to be that hard because, at the end of the day, they are an objective-based unit. So I don't think it's going to be a huge nerf, but they are being used in almost every single, competitive tournament list. So I think they'll see a small points increase. They also have very efficient damage for the cost at 75 points. Having 4 shots a model, having lethal hits is pretty good. It's not, out of this world good or anything like that, but it is very powerful. So, even though the unit is primarily meant for objectives, it's also a unit that can deal damage to a lot of different targets because of their, decently powerful ranged weaponry. And they're definitely not OP by any stretch of the imagination by far. I don't think they're a unit that deserves, a massive points hike or anything like that, but I do see them maybe slightly increasing in points to 80 points, bringing them more in line with the other aspect warriors in our index. Okay, so what will these nerfs mean for competitive play? So depending on the direction they go with the Night Spinner nerf, and again, the Night Spinner is going to get nerfed somehow, the triple spinner builds will become obsolete. I think if they don't affect monsters or vehicles or don't prevent advances anymore, they won't be as universally strong and we won't see as many of them on the board. We'll still probably see 1, maybe 2 in a build, but we're not going to see the triple spinner as often. I think Wraith Guard will also still be good, but not as efficient, especially if Fate's Messenger also gets nerfed in tandem. So if those 2 things get nerfed in tandem, the Wraith Guard and Fate's Messenger, we're going to see a lot less blocks of 10 Wraith Guard on the field. And we might even see Wraith Guard kind of go by the wayside in favor of other units. But let me preface that with saying I think they're still going to be good. I think they're still going to show up in tournament lists, just not as often. I also think that the points increases to the Avatar of Cain and other units might mean that expensive units like Warp Spiders that are 115 points are swapped for swooping Hawks to, shave on some points but still be able to score you those secondaries. Warwalkers might also be swapped for Hornets to shave 10 points here and there. And again, Warwalkers are pretty good. They're just survivable enough to basically force opponents to fire a few more heavy weapons at them before they go down, which is very important in a trading game. But because things are getting more expensive in the Codex, Eldar players are still going to have to keep up the lethality in their armies, and they might have to sacrifice some extra durability for that, which will mean Warwalkers will be swapped to Hornets. And, if points remain the same on the Warwalker and the Hornet, then that will be where the points are saved. So what is the bottom line here? So Eldar armies are going to slightly shrink if taking the Avatar of Cain or Wraith Guard. And if those armies continue to take those units, then they're going to have to take out a unit of swooping Hawks, or they're going to have to take out something in their list. If taking multiple Night Spinners, Eldar armies will have to look elsewhere for efficient indirect fire and board control. So Dark Reapers, Shadow Weavers, and Crimson Hunters might be alternatives in the new meta post-January. And I know how crazy that sounds to some of you because some of you are certain that Dark Reapers suck, but keep in mind that the Dark Reaper Exarch is actually very strong. It has a Tempest Launcher that can, ignore hit modifiers and also has indirect fire. They're also only 80 points a unit, so you can field 2 of these units for every single Night Spinner that you would have had before. So you can have a lot of these guys, up to 3 units, and that can provide a lot of indirect fire. So if you're looking to replace your indirect fire just for damage itself, then Dark Reapers might not be a bad alternative, although they are easier to kill from enemy indirect fire. Shadow Weavers are very vulnerable, but they can also do some decent indirect fire as well. They still have devastating wounds, so you can still kind of go for that if you want. They don't have twin linked. They don't have the cool ability that prevents advances and movement, but, they are there for the damage and they can debuff enemy units with -1 to hit. Crimson Hunters also might be used because of the fact that they are aircraft. They ignore obscuring terrain, so they can hit big targets behind enemy lines in their deployment zone where they might be hidden from your other units, your Fire Prisms, or perhaps even your Warwalkers or Hornets. And the Crimson Hunter is expensive at 160 points and probably will die after it comes in and shoots, but it can guarantee that you can kill some of the enemy's biggest threats. And if you have a lot of trouble with indirect fire, they can certainly take out those indirect fire units with the combination of their 2 Bright Lances and Pulse Laser. Also, if the enemy unit has fly, they can get +1 to hit and +1 to wound, which is very good as well. So the Crimson Hunter might be used as an alternative to some of those things. So in conclusion, the Eldar nerfs are coming in about 8 weeks' time, which is still kind of far off, but it is likely the last set of nerfs for the Eldar that we will see for at least a few balanced data slates. While these are just predictions, everything I've just said is just a prediction again, and not in any way 100% accurate, GW did call out the Night Spinner, Avatar of Cain, and Wraithguard by name in the last MetaWatch interview, so chances are they will get nerfed in some way. So for all you Eldar players out there who, are kind of thinking about, jumping on the triple Night Spinner bandwagon and stuff like that, unless you are a super competitive player, maybe hold off on that, or maybe magnetize your Night Spinners when you get them so that they can also be used as fire prisms. Because chances are they are going to get nerfed, and again, like I said, the triple prism thing isn't going to be an efficient way to use them. Or triple spinner, I should say, not triple prism. I think we'll probably still see triple or double prism from time to time, as I believe they're still going to be pretty good even after January. And I'm also thinking and looking forward to January in a way, because after January, we're probably not going to see many nerfs for the Eldar. We're already at about a 57% win rate, something around there, which is pretty close to that 55% that GW wants them to be at. I think with these new nerfs, we'll probably fall down to about 55, 54, 53 maybe, which will be a good, position to be in for the remainder of the edition until we get our new codex, which, who knows what the new codex is going to look like, what the detachment rules are going to look like. The meta is going to shift in a big way after that. I'm thinking we'll probably see our new codex in 2025, but it could be earlier, we'll see. But regardless, it's a far ways off. The Eldar Codex isn't going to, be in their roadmap for the next year. So it looks like it's going to, kind of be this way for a while, which is good. We have a good detachment bonus. We have, a good faction ability. We have really strong and deep units that do a lot for us. And we have a lot of viable options. And since the nerfs, a lot of options that weren't viable before in competitive play are now starting to see competitive play more and more. And we might see a lot more diversity in lists, in tournaments and things like that, which is always a good thing. So for those of you out there who are fearing the nerfs coming in January, I wouldn't. I would look forward to it, because it looks like we're pretty much on the road to being a very balanced, well-balanced army for the first time since the beginning of the edition. And as of now, I think we're pretty balanced. There's just a few things here and there that maybe need a tiny tweak, so we don't need a lot, and I think GW knows that as well. And because of that, I really don't expect a huge nerf come January. But again, we'll just have to wait and see. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Thank you to all my Patreons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months and last year. This channel has officially been on for a year, which is really awesome. So I do really appreciate that support. If you guys do want to support the channel and join the channel's Patreon, you can. I have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community. And of course, you can always cancel your free trial ahead of time and you won't have to pay anything, but you will still get access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. If you are interested in that, I will leave the link in the description, and it is a very easy registration process. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon through my affiliate link to help support the channel, or you want to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel to rep your local game store, I will leave those links in the description as well. I am currently working on some more Dark Eldar-inspired apparel, so stay tuned for that. That will be coming within the next couple of weeks. And lastly, I am almost done with my Eldar fan decks, my Eldar Knights fan decks. So if you guys do want to support that, I will have a Kickstarter going up again in a couple of days to kind of get some art and hopefully some STL files for that fan decks. But for now, the rules should be completed, at least the rough draft of the index should be completed within the next couple of days, at most 1 week. So look forward to that. If you are in the Discord, if you are a Patreon member or have supported the channel in any way, you will have access to that fan decks. And if you have any other questions about that project, please email me at proxy.hammer1@gmail.com. I'd love to answer any questions that you may have. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching once again, and have some great games this weekend. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.